because there are a lot of hoops to jump through to buy a car with no real valuable paperwork, no straightforward path to export, no straightforward path to US registration, the possibility that it has to be disassembled into a bunch of pieces and then go through a more illegitimate path to getting a title and registration. Surely that's going to alienate most buyers and keep the price down. The market for really high-end cars is hotter in the US than it is anywhere else in the world. There are areas that are catching up and have always been similarly strong, but right now the market in the US is on fire and really has been for the last several years, and that can create the temptation to shop well beyond the reaches of Auto Tempest and try to buy cars internationally and bring them in to arbitrage for a profit. And we've talked a lot about importing cars on VINwiki. I imported an LP670 that was a US car that was crashed. It was then rebuilt in Poland, sold to a guy in Austria. I bought it through a German dealer, Alex Hess, and that was a fun experience to kind of see exactly how it works. For Car Trek 7, we did cars that could recently be imported, including the TVR Cerbera and others, and so I love the process. I'm constantly shopping overseas to see what might be possible, but there's really only 4 ways that a car from overseas can legitimately come into the US and get a title and a registration. The first being if it's 25 years old. At that point, for most states, just not California, it is now exempt from DOT and EPA requirements, and all bets are off. You may have to pay a 2.5% import duty. You may have to pay a 7.5% to 15% tariff at some points, but it is just paperwork, very straightforward. Most DMVs are aware of how this works. It's not that hard to do. The second is what's called federalization, and that is when you bring in a car that is similar to a car sold in the US, and there's a handful of federalization licensed agencies that are allowed to decide when a car comes into compliance. They may change seat belts, airbags, emissions equipment, lighting, things like that, and they're allowed to certify the car as compliant. They may test alongside the EPA. So that's for cars like a Ferrari 360. There were tons of them that became gray market cars by coming in, and for 30 to 50 grand, you could turn a European car into something that could have a US title. The first one that I had for my rental car company was exactly that. Now it's 25 years old. All bets are off. Doesn't really matter, but that is how you can come in the second way. The third is show or display. Now, this was, of course, a law that was pioneered by people like Bill Gates to bring in 959s, and that was one way that they were able to get cars in, but that is only for cars that were not sold in the US. So when we look at cars like the manual LP670 SVs that are overseas, the idea of bringing those in, because we also had them that model year, it doesn't work under show or display. Show and display is how they're bringing in Gordon Murray T50Ss, AMG 1s, Valkyries, cars like this. But that only solves DOT. Most of them still have to be tested by the EPA when they get here, and most of them go to a lab out in Texas for that. It's about 60 grand to test a car for the EPA right now, even if it's an engine that was also sold in the US at the same time. It's always a new slate, and they always have to do it. You can bring a group of cars there that are the same and they can test one, but it's a little bit sticky and it's not the easiest process to work. Also, the handful of employees with the NHTSA that work for show and display were recently fired under the DOGE reduction in force led by Elon Musk, but they have been rehired, so that is back in place. The final one is what's called a letter of compliance or a certificate of compliance that is supposed to be issued by the manufacturer to say that this car is already compliant with US laws because we built them all the same. I think Z8s are this way, that it's pretty easy to get BMW to give you a letter to bring an international one in because they are all, I guess, identical. But that can happen, and there are examples of that happening with certain cars, in particular, one that I'm going to talk about today. So a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a broker out of China that I've dealt with several times. And China is unique because, strictly speaking, you're not allowed to export cars from China. They have more people than they have cars. They need more cars. They don't want them being shipped out. It's not terribly hard to import them, but there are tremendous duties to do so. And there was a car coming up in a government auction that had been previously seized, and it was a Bugatti Veyron world record car, Vitesse. So the Grand Sport Vitesse, the 1,200 horsepower of version of my car, which is a regular Grand Sport with 1,000 horsepower, and they only made 8 to commemorate going 254 miles an hour, 408 kilometers an hour, and setting the open roof top speed record. Super duper cool. One of the coolest liveries that Bugatti ever did. All bare carbon, tinted dark with these gorgeous orange accented interior. I think it is spectacular. But they didn't bring any of them into the US, and only one of them went into China. Now, the original MSRP probably would have been low threes. It was more than $7 million to get the car into China. So the story was that the owner that had imported this car had gone to jail in 2017, and that is when the car had been seized, and it had been sitting there accruing a $7 a day storage fee since 2017, and now it was finally going to be sold. And they said that the ECU or something had been tampered with to try to reflect a VIN of a different car to reduce the taxes. You see a ton of that with like Carrera GTs being titled as Boxsters, anything that could be seen as cheaper to avoid sometimes these 200, 300, 400% tariffs or import duties that other countries around the world face. And so the other thing about China is that when the registration lapses on a car, meaning that you don't keep it up and get it inspected and pay each year to keep your registration valid, it is nearly impossible, or at least financially rarely feasible, to bring the car back into good standing. So there's tons of really, really interesting cars, especially supercars and sports cars of the 2000s and 2010s in China that are kind of in this no man's land or orphaned state where they no longer have valid paperwork. And I get offered cars all the time out of China that don't have any paperwork, including the LP670 SV, the white Canadian VIN car that we talked about several years ago that I think I'd bought in 2019 or agreed to buy for 150 grand, but then a few months later with COVID, they shut all shipping out of China down. And even with the measures that we were prepared to take, we couldn't get it in. Now, in that car's case, because there was no paperwork, it adds an extra layer beyond those four options because it's not eligible for being 25 years old. It's not that old yet. It can't be show or display. It cannot be federalized. And it can't get a letter of compliance because it is materially different, uses different marker lights and things like that. And so there wasn't a great way to bring that car in. What you see beyond that is people doing mechanics liens, bonded titles, court-ordered titles, and things like that. So you can end up getting a title, but in most cases, you really shouldn't get a title that way because it can be a little bit sticky from what happens if something really goes wrong. If the car's ever in an accident and it's proven that the car shouldn't be here, you do expose yourself to some additional liability, so to speak. And so with that car, the car would have had to have been totally disassembled, which it eventually was, and come into the US to be reassembled and then get a title in one of those ways, which it has. So since this car had been in government custody since 2017, its registration had lapsed, and even though it would have theoretically been eligible to be paid to get back into good standing, it was extraordinarily unlikely that anyone in China would pay what it would take to do that. So that meant that most of the bidders would likely be from overseas, but there was not a straightforward path to get an export certificate to clear customs to get the car out of China. Sometimes cars get smuggled out of Hong Kong, but it was going to be sticky, but at least I was open to it because the opening bid with no reserve beyond that was the equivalent of about $870,000 US, which is a steal. Today, this car, if it were like perfect in the US, really any special Vitesse would be, give or take 4.5, maybe $5-6 million. And so considerably more than my car is a 1,000 horsepower car. And this is one of the things that I certainly would consider selling mine for because it's just a cooler, more special, more valuable version. And so I'm like, well, if there aren't that many bidders, because there are a lot of hoops to jump through to buy a car with no real valuable paperwork, no straightforward path to export, no straightforward path to US registration, the possibility that it has to be disassembled into a bunch of pieces and then go through a more illegitimate path to getting a title and registration, surely that's going to alienate most buyers and keep the price down. And so I told the broker that I was open to paying, 1.2, 1.3 if that's what it took, which is really about all I could scrape together on a line of credit that I could hopefully refinance once I had a US title and then eventually sell mine and kind of turn the equity into this car, which is always a mathematical process of cartwheel deals that I like to achieve. And the auction estimate was about 9 million renminbi, which is Chinese yuan, their currency, which is the equivalent of about 1.3 million US, which to me was appropriate money given all the circumstances surrounding the car. And I was hopeful that that might buy it. Now, the problem with trying to get money into China is that it's a lot stickier and a lot slower than trying to wire money into Europe or Australia or something like that. And so it was going to be hard, and they required an earnest money deposit, kind of equivalent to the anticipated auction fee of about $100,000. And you would get it back eventually if you lost and if you could trust everybody in the equation. And I felt like I probably could, but I was gonna wait to do that because they announced it a couple weeks before it was actually gonna go, and then whatever, it was gonna take a while. So I was gonna wait, kick that can down the road, and to see how many other bidders actually showed up. Now, even the broker I had, who goes back and forth between China and in the US a lot, was not able to bid. It had to be a Chinese person or entity bidding on the car. And so I knew that I was gonna need them as a representative, and they started to add some terms. They wanted a couple $100,000 more as earnest money because they would be essentially prosecuted if they were to bid and then not perform. So that got a little sticky. Then eventually they wanted all of it. And finally I was like, look guys, I'm not going to do that. I hope that you can buy the car for less, but regardless of circumstances, I'm willing to pay what I was planning to bid to. If you can make money there and I'm the right buyer, you can go buy it and do it. So we were watching it all together, and they were okay with that fundamentally because they knew that I was committed. I was easy to find and showed them proof of access to such funds. And so they were bidding, and the bids start to come in very much at the last minute. Not unlike Bring a Trailer Cars and bids any of these others, but really in the last hour, there's finally 12 different bidders registered, and the bid just starts to go crazy. And I'm surprised by this because the bids are going almost immediately well past what I wanted to pay. And that's not wildly shocking because, again, this is very, very cheap relative to what the car would theoretically be worth in better condition, better circumstances. And so someone else can rationalize more than I can, and certainly many, many people have more means than I do to accomplish this. But, it also comes down to the equation that we talk about a lot, which is there's the money, there's the title, and there's the car. And in a deal, no one is ever supposed to have all three. But when you buy a car internationally, that doesn't work anymore. Someone has to have all three, and it's not you. You got to send the money when they can't send you the title, and obviously the car's got to come later. And so you are really hung out to dry in a lot of these circumstances, depending on how the deal progresses. And so it started to get well past my comfort zone, and it ended at about $1.9 million, well beyond the estimate, well beyond what me, the broker, the reps over there, anybody really thought the car was worth. Again, given the circumstance, obviously it's worth a lot more once you deal with all the things, but those things were going to be very, very expensive. The best case scenario was going to be, like I said earlier, a letter of compliance, which might have been possible. There's another super sport that's in the US, kind of the 8th US super sport, that came in under those circumstances. It was a former press car, blue Bear carbon car, and he was able to get a letter of compliance from Bugatti to bring it in. So I felt like I might have been able to call Mate Rimac and ask him for such a thing if I were to own the car, but there was no sense in asking that beforehand. And so regardless, I didn't get it, but it's always fun to chase a car like that and go through the mental arithmetic of how it might end up working or how it might be able to end up in your garage. But regardless, I'm still very happy with mine, and sometimes the best stories are the cars that you don't end up getting to buy. Congratulations to whoever did. This month of VINwiki content is brought to you by Bridgestone, and the most exciting tire from Bridgestone right now is the brand new RE71RZ. That's their extreme max performance summer tire that is championing pole position. It's built for the grassroots motorsports crowd and offers much better on-track wear patterns than we saw out of the amazing RE71RS that it is now replacing. It uses Bridgestone's enlightened technology to deliver long-lasting performance and much more responsive control. And the RE71RZ is now available across North America in 45 sizes since December 31st of last year. This new tire meets all requirements for SCCA racing and will be eligible for competition use in 2026 for solo and time trials. This new tire is 0.74 seconds faster on a dry lap and 0.75 of a second faster in a wet lap compared to the outgoing RE71RS. This really is an amazing new sports car and supercar tire from Bridgestone, so check it out now, along with everything else that we love about Bridgestone, at the link in the description below.